Hello, Hot Mess historians. This is Janet, your Hot Mess hostess, and let's find out exactly what happened to the Donner Party as they were stranded in the mountains. As they are just shy of the summit to get through the pass, George Donner has sliced his hand open. He falls behind the group. The large chunk of these individuals move forward and decide we're going to keep trucking along. George and the Donners will catch up eventually. Unfortunately, they run out of time, and by the time the large group says, forget waiting around for the Donners, we're going straight through the pass, it's completely blocked by snow, and they're stuck in a blizzard. They've missed the pass by 1 day. At this point, the group that has moved through the Hastings cutoff and they're all together, the group totals about 81 people. It's 25 men, 15 women, and 41 children, 6 of whom are nursing infants. So the situation is extremely dire. They're very low on provisions. Knowing that they're not going to be able to get through the pass, they make their way back to Truckee Lake and essentially set up camp. They know that they're going to have to sit out the winter. Now, there are 2 camps essentially that take place at the lake. The large group kind of gathers around an already constructed and abandoned cabin that the Breens take over, the Breen family. Patrick Breen started keeping a diary somewhere around November 20th. So that's how we know what actually is occurring at these camps at the lake. In the large camp, we have the Breens, the Kesselbergs, the Eddies, the Murphys, Fosters, Pikes, and Reids. And off of this main cabin that had already previously been erected, the Kesselbergs sort of build a lean-to up against that cabin. The Eddy family starts building from scratch a very crude log cabin that ultimately will house the Eddies, the Murphys, the Fosters, and the Pikes. And yet another makeshift cabin will house the Graves and the Reids, Margaret Reid and her children, because remember, her husband James Reid had been exiled and sent off on his own. So he's already gone. It's just Margaret, his wife, and their children. A few miles away, a few miles further, are the Donners. They never were able to catch up to the main group and have to sort of shelter in place where they were through the storms and the snow that's coming down. And they did not have sort of that template or already erected cabin, so they are sheltering in tents. And you have to remember, I mean, there are blizzards going on. They're in cloth tents. It's freaking freezing. Nobody's having a good time. By about December 1st, the provisions are all but gone. The little meat that they have from slaughtering their oxen and that cattle is being mixed with really anything that could be chewed or swallowed. They're boiling hides. They're consuming charred bones, twigs, leaves, bark. They are trying to exist and make it through this horrific winter on whatever they can find. It's not like you can go and scavenge really, because everything is under just huge mountains of snow. The lake that they're camped out next to, yes, there are fish in the lake, but it's frozen over, and each attempt at trying to catch something comes back as failure. On December 15th, Ballas Williams was one of the first to perish of malnutrition. And on December 16th, there is a decision made that a group of scouts, so to speak, are going to try to get through the pass. It's going to be a much smaller group, a group of really the strongest that they have among them. And they're going to try to get through the pass, get to help, and come back with provisions and support. It ultimately becomes a group of about 15 immigrants, 5 women, 9 men, and 1 12-year-old boy. Franklin Graves had constructed some very crude makeshift snowshoes using ox bows, which was sort of part of the reins or that harness that the oxen would use or wore to pull the wagons. And so he sort of made these very crude snowshoes for them so that they could have a better chance walking through those drifts and those mountains of snow. William Eddy and the 2 Indian guides that were with them, Luis and Salvador, lead this group out toward the summit. They called themselves the Forlorn Hope. Once the Forlorn Hope get past the summit, they made it through the pass, they're on the other side. The sun beaming down on the snow is actually blinding them, and so it's very slow going because they can't see very well. They're exhausted from fighting the weather, and they don't have very much food, so they run out of food by the 6th day on their scouting trip. And Charles Stanton, he was the one that went for help and provisions earlier. He made it all the way to Fort Sutter and back with the 2 Indian guides and mules laden with supplies and food. He can no longer go on, and he just sits down, and he's last seen sitting in the snow smoking a pipe. By Christmas Eve, they have been without food for 3 days. They are unable to get any substantial fire going because of the winds and the frigid temperatures. A fire just can't be maintained. And this is really the first point that cannibalism becomes a factor or a concept. So they've already existed on near starvation type conditions. They've been without food, so far no food at all, for 3 days. And they decide, this little group of the Forlorn Hope, or what remains of them, decide that they're going to have sort of a lottery. They're going to pull straws, and whoever gets the short straw is the one that will be eaten. Patrick Dolan is the one that draws the short straw. But when it comes down to it, the group decides, there's no way that we can kill him and eat him. That's just it. We're not that far gone yet. But this is sort of the introduction to that concept for these survivors, or these stranded immigrants. About 11 o'clock that night, a huge snowstorm blows in, and Antonio, who is one of the teamsters along for to help drive the oxen, and Franklin Graves die from malnutrition throughout this storm. Patrick Dolan ultimately goes insane and had to be restrained, and once he was restrained, he slipped into a coma and passed away. Once the storm has died down, they're able to get a fire lit. They dig themselves out of the snow, and that's when the cannibalism begins. They begin cutting the flesh off of these deceased party members and dispersing it amongst themselves, having no choice but to consume their comrades. The Indian guides, Luis and Salvador, are absolutely appalled at this. They refuse to participate in this, and I can't even watch it happen. And as the remaining party members get ready to move out and move forward, they bundle up the remains that they have kind of cut up and prepared, and they actually label them so that you're not eating someone that you're related to. And this is that first moment of desperation where you see just how horrific the conditions were for these party members who were stranded. 3 more days for the Forlorn Hope, and they have once again run out of food. And William Foster suggests that they just kill the Indian guides and eat them. But the rest of the group is like, no, we are not going to do that. But Foster cannot be reasoned with. He is, regardless if there's a vote, he is set and determined that he is going to murder the Indians and he is going to eat them. So William Eddy goes to Luis and Salvador and says, look, this guy's crazy. He's talking about killing you and eating you. You're not safe. I just wanted to let you know what was going on. Luis and Salvador say, yeah, this is getting a little bit too real for us. We out. And they leave. So going back a little bit to the remaining immigrants at the lake. Remember, Breen is keeping this diary so that we know what's happening as they're camped out there and trying to get through this. On December 21st, he writes that Jacob Donner, Sam Shoemaker, Joseph Reinhardt, and James Smith have passed away, and that the rest of the members that are camped out with the Donners are in a low disposition. So things are not looking great for these survivors. On January 10th, 1847, the U.S. Marines have taken Los Angeles from Mexico. And now that the fighting is over, James Reid, who we know has already made it to California, can begin to raise rescue parties to help go find his family and the rest of the immigrants. On January 17th, 1847, William Eddy, who at this point is essentially a skeleton of a man, and 6 more survivors of the Forlorn Hope arrive in California. They make it to Johnson's Ranch in California. Only 2 out of the 10 men made it alive, but all 5 women made it. Now, when William Eddy had recovered enough to speak about his ordeal, it's revealed that while Lewis and Salvador, those Indian guides, had taken off, they became so weak in malnutrition that the rest of the group ultimately caught up with them and found them laying face down in the snow, too weak to move on, too weak to defend themselves, and horrifically, they were shot and killed and then consumed. Naturally, everyone is shocked in hearing what they've been through, what is going on, who knows what's happening back at camp, are there people still alive? The alarm is raised and search parties and rescue parties begin to form. Meanwhile, back at Truckee Lake on February 5th, Breen reports that they are all but out of food and William Eddy's daughter had died the night before. February 8th, 2 more members are reported dead, and February 10th, another immigrant at camp has passed away. February 19th, the first rescue party clears the pass and comes into view of the lake. They are absolutely shocked and devastated at the conditions that they found the immigrants living in, and really the conditions of the immigrants themselves. They reported that there were 12 dead bodies laid atop the snow, merely covered in blankets, and that there were 48 that were still alive, although some had gone insane at this point and were too far gone to be revived. It's important to note that at this point, so far, none of the survivors that are camped out at the lake have resorted to cannibalism. They have not been forced to eat human flesh. The immigrants that are passing away, that are dying of natural causes or malnutrition, but they're not being consumed. They're not being murdered. They're just dying. This first rescue party can only take back 24 survivors with them. It's a very small party. They know that there are more rescue parties that are coming, but this particular one can only take 24 with them. The Breens and George Donner's family volunteer to stay behind, and Margaret Reid and 2 of her children are going with the 24. February 22nd, the first relief party or first rescue party is heading back to California with their 24 survivors. Unfortunately, they were not able to bring enough with them to leave supplies and food for the remaining 31 immigrants that are going to be staying back at the lake. You have to assume that the immigrants who volunteered to stay behind knew that they were going to be left pretty much in the same condition that they were found in. It has to kind of be obvious. Not like today, it's not going to be an airdrop of supplies. There's not going to be a truck coming through momentarily, nothing like that. They really just came with what they had. As the first relief party is making its way back to California, they pass the second relief party that's going back up to where the immigrants are still stranded. And in this second relief party is James Reid. So he, for the first time, is seeing his wife and 2 of his children alive. Maybe not healthy, maybe not in the best condition, but they are alive. And of course, Margaret and the children have presumed he was dead. So this is a very happy moment in an extremely devastating and horrific moment, all at the same time. By the time the second relief party makes it to the lake, James is elated to find that his 2 children that stayed behind are alive. Unfortunately, 10 more immigrants had died, and the survivors have now resorted to eating the flesh of those that have perished. March 12th, the third relief party arrives at the lake and found only 7 immigrants alive. Throughout all of this ordeal, from the first, second, and now third rescue party, George Donner has fallen very, very ill. It doesn't specify if he's sick with pneumonia from the cold weather, if it's malnourishment, if it's an infection from when he slashed his hand open. All we know is that he's fallen very ill. And his wife Tamsin has been consistently volunteering to stay behind, to stay with him, because she does not want to leave him. And this third relief party, while only finding 7 alive, find Tamsin alive and very well, and George is still hanging on, so he's still alive. The fourth rescue party has been delayed almost a full month because of yet more blizzards. They were not able to get through the storms and get to the campsite for the remaining survivors. On April 17th, the 4th Relief Party arrives to find only one survivor at this point. Louis Kesselberg is the only one alive. He's found in his cabin, absolutely delirious, and surrounded by half-eaten remains of the others that have died. Tamsin Donner, who stayed behind, volunteered to stay behind each and every time. She did not want to leave her husband. Her remains are never found. April 25th, all of the survivors have made it to California, and it had been almost exactly a year to the day from when George Donner, Jacob Donner, and James Reid left Springfield, Illinois with their family. That winter, it's reported that there were 9 total blizzards, and it was recorded as being the worst winter ever recorded in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Only 46 of the 87 members of the Donner Party survived. 2/3 of the women and children made it out alive. 2/3 of the men perished. The reason that it's most commonly referred to as the Donner Party, even though it was James Reid, who was sort of the impromptu leader at the beginning of the trek, and the Donners weren't really with the main group. I mean, this is several families that were involved in this tragedy. But the reason it's referred to as the Donner Party is because the Donner family really was the most devastated. All 4 adults and all 4 children from the Donner families perished in the mountains. All of the Reids and all of the Breens survived. Those were the only 2 families that remained whole. Of course, stories of the tragedy and events that occurred began spreading like wildfire throughout the country. The stories, diary entries, interviews, things like that were being printed in the newspapers and dispersed across the nation. And understandably, following this disaster, immigration to California dropped off dramatically. The numbers slowed way up, and the Hastings cutoff was abandoned altogether. No one was touching that road, which makes sense. Granted, the immigration would pick up significantly because in January 1848, gold is discovered in John Sutter's Creek, and by late 1849, more than 100,000 people will rush to California seeking their fortune.